Ukraine continues to strike back at Russia, targeting key naval and energy assets in the Black Sea, even as global oil prices soar amid the Strait of Hormuz blockade. Meanwhile, in Hungary, an alleged sabotage plot on a major pipeline has raised questions about election day provocations and Russian influence. Now, this is something that we have been discussing in our show, but now to discuss the latest developments on those key points is Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Post. Bohdan, so happy to have you here with us on TVP World. So, Bohdan,
great to be with you again.
Now, we're just days away before Hungary's general election on the 12th of April. And Hungary is now accusing Ukraine of planting explosives on this key gas link. Opposition figures are calling it a potential false flag operation ahead of the vote. I want to ask you what you think and, of course, what your take is on this. I mean, could Ukraine have undertaken such an operation? Is this something that may have been orchestrated by Russia? What's Kyiv saying? What is the Ukrainian government saying?
Well, the government has denied, of course, any participation in it. The mood here in Kyiv is, taking this almost as a joke, because everybody was expecting some kind of provocation from Orban on the eve of the election to blame the Ukrainians. And nobody expected it would take place in Serbia. They were expecting this within Hungary, an assassination attempt staged, some sort of explosion supposedly carried out by Ukrainians, etc. So the surprise is simply that it happened in Serbia. But the whole exercise seems to have backfired because, as we've seen, the Serbian security authorities themselves have said, no, the Ukrainians are not behind this, at least as far as we know, and there's no evidence of that. And so it really seems to be in a cheap ploy that has backfired, and hopefully Orban will pay the price for this. But again, there's some sort of cooperation with elements in Serbia, which is not encouraging. But on the whole, Orban has come out poorly in this episode. But let's not forget, there's still a week, just less than a week to go. And there could be other tricks up Orban's sleeve, up Moscow's sleeve. So, this may not be all that is in store for us this week.
Bohdan, the United States is sending reportedly Vice President J.D. Vance to Budapest to endorse Orban, highlighting, of course, a broader alignment between Viktor Orbán, between Moscow and MAGA supporters now just ahead of those elections. What does that mean for Ukraine?
Well, it's not a good signal. Of course, we've been expecting it because this visit had been announced, and it's been very clear that Trump supports Orban as his man, not only Putin's man, but his Trump's man in Europe. Not only because of his opposition to Ukraine, but also because of his damaging work within the EU itself. So Vance's visit, I don't think, is going to make a big difference. I think it will probably just confirm to Europeans and Ukrainians what they've already suspected or known about the Trump administration's position. But more importantly is, how will the Hungarian population receive this? And if they are on the ball, if they are following the news, and if they are watching events as closely as in other countries, then I don't think this is going to be an advantage for Orban. I think this is, again, going to backfire, and he's going to be looking as if he's a puppet both of Moscow and of Washington.
But let me shift now for a moment to Ukraine's military operations. Most recently, of course, Kyiv struck a Russian missile carrier in Novorossiysk. How significant do you think this is actually strategically, and most importantly, what impact do these kinds of attacks actually have on Russia's war machine, particularly moving forward?
I think it's very important because it's very bad for Russian morale. And how do you explain this to Putin? How do you tell the Führer in Moscow that another strike by the Ukrainians, a successful one? But more importantly, I think, rather than hitting ships, is the very heavy damage that Ukraine has continued to carry out on energy infrastructure in Russia, both right up in the Baltic area between St. Petersburg and Finland, and more recently down, in the Black Sea region. That is devastating because right now they're finding it very difficult to cash in on the high oil prices and export their oil when their infrastructure is being so badly damaged. Ukrainians too, Ukraine is taking a pummeling, but you see the difference is that the Russians are aiming at cities, at towns, at shopping centers, at bus stops, at vehicles, whereas Ukrainians are going for these strategic spots, linked to infrastructure, linked to the military. And of course, this is not something that you can sell to your domestic public so easily in Russia. How do you explain that after 4 years of war, the Ukrainians are managing to do this?
Do you think that all these latest Ukrainian attacks on Russia is actually going to be successful in disrupting Russia's naval operations in a meaningful way?
Well, I think naval operations have already been stopped 2 or 3 years ago. I think the Black Sea Fleet has been forced, what's left of it has been forced to move right into safer areas in the east of the Black Sea. Even in the Baltic Sea, they feel insecure. And therefore, I don't think it's going to have much of an impact on naval prowess, naval strength. I think the crucial thing is, the war of attrition is going on still in the air, not at sea. Russians are pounding cities like Odessa, for example, not just Kiev and Kharkiv, because they want to stop grain exportation, damage the Ukrainian economy. And the Ukrainians are hitting them back by, as I've said, aiming at the energy infrastructure and hitting them where it really hurts. But Ukrainians also have serious problems. It's not all sort of win-win for Ukrainians, even with their recent successes in hitting these very strategic targets. Ukraine desperately needs diesel oil. And of course, if Hungary and Slovakia stop supplying it and it has to rely on countries like Romania, for example, or others, the supply is limited. But diesel is essential not only for the military, and primarily for the military, but also for the civilian population. And we've seen in Ukraine, diesel prices skyrocket, doubled in the last days, in the last week or two. So, as I've emphasized, in this war of attrition, both sides are being hit very badly. Fortunately for Ukraine, it's not just Ukraine on the receiving end, it's giving as good as it's having to take.
Bohdan, a little earlier in the show, I spoke to our correspondent who is in Kiev, and he mentioned, he talked a little bit about Russia's unsuccessful spring offensive, that it's not meeting its goals. What can you tell me? What can you tell me about that, particularly in terms of the territory that Russia wanted to gain, but reportedly is? I mean, this all isn't going as planned.
Look, let's step back a year or two. Putin has said ages ago that he wants all of the Donbass, all of it, and it will be taken within this deadline. Sounds a bit like Trump, we will do this within a certain deadline. Well, it wasn't done then in another month or 2 or 3 or 5 or half a year. And so the Russians have not really made any dramatic advances during the last year. And in the last months, the Ukrainians have regained territory. According to British intelligence sources that Zelensky cited, These last months have been probably the most successful for the Ukrainians on the front lines in terms of not only holding back the Russians, but also regaining territory. Not huge amounts of territory, but significant, symbolically important territory. But what is important here is that the Russians continue to lose a colossal number of men. And this sort of attitude of not paying any respect for human life, it may have worked 2 or 3 years ago, but right now within Russia itself, not just mothers, relatives are asking questions. Military officers are asking questions. What sort of logic, what sort of strategy is behind this cannon fodder tactic? And according to not only Ukrainian sources, but Western allied sources, Russian losses continue to be very, very great on a daily basis. Obviously, the Ukrainians are also losing people, and they're finding it hard to mobilize new recruits, even if it has to be done forcibly sometimes. But in Russia, this problem is amplified, and I don't know how Putin is going to get out of this short of declaring a full mobilization.
Thank you so much, Bohdan Nahaylo, Editor-in-Chief of the Kyiv Post, for all your insight here today on World News Tonight. Thanks for being with us.
Yep.
And that's all for this episode of World News Tonight here on TVP World. My name is Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching, but don't go away. Stay with us here for more news and exclusive interviews.